Happy to take questions or brickbats or... He has one, he's one.
Sort of a question, sort of a point. I'm like lots of people accepted the status quo of, you know, you're not paying, you get stuff for free. But I've noticed recently...
It's a creeping thing.
The thing that stood out to me recently, I noticed the way that Google is tracking by IP address.
Oh, yeah.
I've got separate computers. I work from home. I've got my work computer.
Yep.
I've got my home computer. They're completely separated, not using the same Chrome accounts or anything like that.
But
do some searches on work. You go on a laptop.
But you're using the same browser, and your browser is fingerprintable. Because it will...
I know, I'm using Edge on one. I'm using Chrome on another, a different operating system. But yeah, I go to Google, or even my wife. I start typing a search term, and it's auto-completed with what she searched for an hour ago, because it knows we're in the same house.
Yeah.
And that's pretty terrifying. The other thing is those companies, a lot of those companies on that list are, not only are they got profiles, they are identity providers. You can log in to other sites with Google and Facebook.
Like anyone who was sensible would do that.
Yeah. So they're putting themselves up as an authoritative identity provider.
Which they're totally incapable of doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they can't be authoritative on identity. They can have a damn good stab. This is actually, I put this idea out on the PC Pro podcast a couple of months ago when Elon bought Twitter, which is the one thing that Elon Musk is exceptionally good at, the best I have ever met of anybody, is recognizing where things are going to go. He was there with PayPal, and he got out of PayPal, what, $350 million or something he took out of PayPal when he sold it. He was there with Tesla, electric cars, way, way, way before anybody else. There's actually an extremely good podcast went out last night by one of the car magazines in the UK, and it's got the 4 top car designers, Gordon Murray, Mate Rimet, and so forth, in one video. And they just sing the praises of what Elon did for cars and totally revolutionizing that space. Reusable rockets. Huge, 25, 30 year. Maybe we won't get to Mars by 2050. It doesn't really matter. It's the long vision. Starlink. Incredible. The long, big vision. And that's what he's exceptionally good at. So why did he buy Twitter? Well, there is this long, big vision thing, which is just off the top of my head. So, you know, this is not privileged information or anything, which is, I think he's worked out that in 5 to 10 years' time, you are going to have to be authenticated on the internet by legislation. The governments won't do it, but the governments will create a mandated level of trustability, if I can use such a word, of authentication. I think he's quite prepared to slash and burn Twitter to build an authentication engine of users. The $5 a month bit, it's noise. The important point is getting to the point where you actually know who somebody is. And then wouldn't there be a really long vision bit, a very Elon thing, which is now selling authentication in that new legislative framework to other companies? And wouldn't it be hilarious if Twitter provided authentication services to Facebook? Because Facebook couldn't do it themselves. Now, this is total conjecture, but if you take the shape of the things that he has done in the past, he didn't buy Twitter just because he kind of was, you know, like shouting into it at 2 o'clock in the morning. There is a bigger plan there. The problem is he had to basically tank the company, lay off 3/4 of the staff, totally reshape it, but use it as a platform to build something entirely new and different. And I don't think we have got any concept yet publicly of what that new and different is. This could be complete hogwash. You know, Twitter could be bankrupt next month and we all stand around saying, what the hell happened to the smoking wreck? But I think, based on what he's done in the past, that is the logical progression, because there is a screaming need. And the politicians will discover that what they're trying to do won't work. They'll discover that the companies out there, you know, who are not even necessarily UK territory, they're not even necessarily UK based. And if they really put the screws on, do you think Facebook would pull out of the UK? Sure they would. Sure they would. Why? Because one simple reason: A, they can afford to, and B, they know just how unpopular that will be with the voters. You tell anybody under the age of 30, please tell me if I'm wrong, because I guess you're kind of under 30, I'm just having a go. You say to somebody out, the potential of the United States banning TikTok. What do you think that's going to do to the next congressional elections? Yeah? And that's the game. This is the level at which these stakes are running. Okay, so yeah, the EEC, or EU, sorry, I'm too old, I said EEC. The EU can come up with this very well-meaning legislative framework, etc., but will they actually be able to make it stick, and in what time frame? And please bear in mind, what can I say? In my day job, we have the opportunity to materially move the share price of major companies. Okay? That's about as far as I can go down that road. If we got it wrong, just how many thousand lawyers do you think someone like HP could have camped outside my front door? They could ring Huntingdon in KCs, they are now QCs, yeah? Because they have an unlimited budget. I did the sum actually for a client and said, we've got to get this right, because at that time, the top 7 companies in IT, we're talking about 5 years ago or something like that, they had something like $5 or $6 trillion in free cash. Apple sat on 2 trillion of cash and investable bonds and stuff like that, right? If you really pissed off Tim Cook, just how badly do you think he could screw up your day? Yeah? Tim Cook's a great guy, He's a phenomenal chap. He was entirely right and proper that he took over as head of Apple after Steve died, because, he was the guy that understood the whole manufacturing process, and manufacturing is tough, and Apple's manufacturing process is second to none. Samsung can't match it. They have so much resources available to them, they could just take you down for the rest of your lifetime, and your children and your children's children. These are the size of companies that we're dealing with now. Yeah, I know Facebook is in not very good financial, and Google's losing money, or their profits are coming down and all the rest of it. But when you have that kind of reach, these are now planet-level organizations with planet-level strength. More strength than the EU does. And they will have no hesitation whatsoever in taking on the EU or the US government. None at all. They just want to make sure it's done on their terms, and they know how to play this game. Sorry, I was ranting, went sideways. Another question. I tend to do that.
I'm intrigued to know, Jon, who it is that you trust. So an example would be, I remember when Google was in almost that trust sphere with the don't do anything evil.
Yeah, that lasted a long time.
And everybody trusted that.
Yeah.
And now Google are seen as, the evil of the main players, I'd say. So who do you trust? Do you use Apple Pay?
Yes.
You trust Apple?
Trust is a very big word, which is why I put it at the first slide. And trust can have a capital T and it can have a lowercase t. It can be 2-point Helvetica, it can be 100-point Helvetica in bold. Okay, so the problem is that trust is not a binary on-off. You know that, I know that. I trust...
Do you trust the government?
No. God, no. Of any persuasion. I hate all politicians, please, but this is not the current lot. I don't trust any of them. Yeah. Do I trust the competency of the civil service? Absolutely not. They are truly terrifying. As a collective group, if you can paint with a wide brush. I distrust Apple the least. And I know that's kind of like a double negative and coming from the bottom up. But the reason I say that is Apple has gone public many, many times stating user privacy policy and has actually enacted this. I mean, it took what, 25% off the turnover of Facebook last year by turning on the masking technologies on iPhone.
San Bernardino thing, right? When they refused to unlock that iPhone.
Yeah.
In theory, you look at that and think, that's crazy, you should do it, because it's for good reasons.
No.
But actually...
No, I mean, this whole idea that GCHQ wants to have back doors. Yeah. No, sorry. And any politician who wants to trump this out, I'll quite happily say, you are stupid, you don't understand the problem. That's totally clear cut. They want it because it's easy. And of course they want an easy life. I mean, duh. North, south, west. Sorry, north of the river, south of the river, and Cheltenham, of course they want to have an easy life and gaining access to encryption. But here's the problem. They'll only ever catch the low-hanging fruit, the stupid ones, because the people who've got the real money, who are Mr. Nasties, have got unlimited funds to create custom technology. Now, here's the scary one. I think I wrote this up in a PC Pro column some years ago, just out of sheer naughtiness, which is, why were there so many cat videos on YouTube? Because there's cat and dog videos. They're everywhere, aren't they? Why are there so many cat videos on YouTube? And the answer is because we'd actually used a wave function in the noise floor on still frames in video to encode data. It's low data rate, but who cares? Bandwidth is unlimited, right? So where would the most pure, perfect place be to hide data? The answer is cat videos on YouTube, because you wouldn't be able to find the data unless you knew the reverse function. You knew the reverse steganography to pull it out again. And wouldn't that just be, and the nerds of us from the Kicks days, we still talk about this, and what would it actually take to, put stuff in like that, just out of sheer naughtiness. Not with any criminal intent, obviously, because life is too short. But just to prove the point that if suddenly there was, gigabytes of, the whole of Shakespeare encoded into cat videos, it would be really quite amusing, I think. So I don't trust any of these. The reason I trust Apple is because they have gone public so many times, and if they are caught lying, actively lying as opposed to getting something wrong. I mean, a software fault is one thing, actively lying is a different thing. The Wall Street would have them in court quicker than you could say, holy crap. So it's only because they actually have put their necks on the line publicly as board members of the company that I would trust them to that level. I don't hold services in the cloud. All of our storage for the lab is internal to the network. We use encrypted cloud backup stuff, but we actually do foresight replication. I don't trust antivirus companies. They have access to everything on your hard disk. Why would I trust them? I trust Microsoft reasonably well, far more now than I ever used to.
It's interesting. It used to be that Google were seen as the white of the white.
Oh yeah. But the days of Steve Ballmer were crazy old days. I kind of miss them really because they were real cowboys back then, and they're incredibly frustrating, but kind of fun, kind of a early days of the internet kind of way. Now they are much more serious, and I think Microsoft, out of the big players, is the trustworthy one. If I had to go and put stuff into a public-facing cloud service, I would put it into Azure.
Microsoft and Apple, and they're not advertising businesses, are they? Google is.
Apple isn't really. No. Google is. Yeah. Microsoft makes things. Facebook is just, a huge data warehouse. Twitter, up till fairly recently, has been a huge data warehouse. Apple isn't. Apple doesn't derive income in any meaningful way from advertising. Let's not get embroiled in silliness like an app being promoted in the Apple App Store, because, sorry, that's in the noise. No, they're not actively trying to data mine you. So, yeah, I mean, I liked what Steve was doing. I love what he did with Next, but I know that's making me feel a very old person. And when he came back in and they started work on Mac OS X, I really liked what he was doing in the 2000s. And then in 20 years, I actually moved whole scale onto Mac as my primary desktops and workstations 10, 15 years ago. Windows is a fine operating system, provided you run it in a virtual machine, because then you can snapshot it and shut it down and throw it over there, please. You know, any product that requires you to install a third party, or doesn't require, but requires you to have an antivirus product running, to me is a bit broken in 2023. There is malware for Macs, but it's super, super rare. I mean, incredibly rare. I think there's something like 7 pieces active in the world. It's nonsense. I love iPads. I love what they do. People hate Apple's lockdown walled garden, but they forget, as I said, my dear old mother said, that everything in nature balances. Yes, there's a downside to a walled garden, but there's an upside too. Okay? Now, you choose. If you'd rather have, you know, what happens on Android, then that's fine. Go to Android. I have everything. You know, you wouldn't believe what we spend annually on hardware for the lab to have as reference equipment. And I know from the developer perspective, just look at how Apple enforces recent versions of platform support in apps, which Google doesn't. Google is, with Google 14, I think was announced yesterday, a few days ago, Android 14. They're now going to mandate that your app must be at least Android 6 or later. Because Android 6 is where they introduced the granularity on permissions. Yeah, and before that, it was wide open. Yeah, but Apple and iOS is way, way more up to date and mandated, and I think that's a good thing. I can see why people wouldn't want that. I run Linux. We've got Linux on servers, Linux on desktop. You know, Cinnamon Mint, fabulous, works. It's a bit cranky, but then so am I. You know, Cinnamon Mint. Linux, it's a great platform, not a problem. If you want to use that, fine by me. LibreOffice, great platform. The latest version was out a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, great, superb. If you like Office 97, nothing wrong with that. Here it is with some new shiny buttons. Yeah, people don't want to pay for subscriptions on software. I think we're going to see a big backlash against this sort of rolling subscription nonsense. And there are phenomenally good pieces of software that are free or single payment. I mean, I was showing some earlier. This is just on an iPad, but I mean that's cool. This is 4K video editing on an iPad, DaVinci. It's just come out. If you wanted, this is Affinity Photo. It's 30 quid photo app. And everything you could possibly want in there, all the tools, 30 quid, one off, full upgrade licenses forever. Great. British company, Affinity. There are plenty of things out there where you don't have to get stuck into paying monthly taxes and so forth. And I like that. I like the Apple ecosystem. The one thing that Apple gets really right, which Samsung doesn't, I have said this many times to them, is that with Apple, 2 + 2 = 5. What I mean by that is if you have a this and you have a that and you then have a phone, you end up with something that's more than the sum of the parts, right? So I get into my car, parked outside, it's got a replacement, 10-year-old Audi, it's got a replacement Pioneer head unit, it does wireless Apple CarPlay. I get into the car, I turn the engine on, and it says, you're in Cambridge. It's 9 o'clock. It's actually 8:30. It's 9 o'clock. You're probably going home. So this is the route to home. Do you want to do it? Yes. Oh, cool. Does. And then my watch automatically starts giving me tapping instructions for route instructions. I haven't plugged anything in. I haven't had to do anything. This is machine learning. I hate to use the term artificial intelligence. This is machine learning that works for me. This is the 2 + 2 =... Well, my blood sugar went a bit high. So I'm insulin injecting diabetic and it real-time monitors me from there. So I'm beeping loudly. Android doesn't do that. If I have an Android phone and I get into a car and I have an Android car, I don't get that joined together. I don't get that, what I call fabric, where things join together to create a fabric. And it's really interesting that Matter, which is the new API that everybody's using, is basically Apple. It's astonishing what Apple's putting back in. Qi, wireless charging. Yeah, Qi Mark II is MagSafe. Apple has just given it to the industry and said, look, for Christ's sakes, do it properly. Please use this. MagSafe 2. Boom, right? And I like that. But people saying, oh, wow, you know, Apple's moving off Lightning connector, thankfully. And people saying, well, why didn't you move off to USB-C years ago? Well, there's a lot of devices out there that have got Lightning cables and connectors and stuff like that. And Apple is actually remarkably slow at moving on some of these things and unbelievably fast on other things. Their silicon work is second to none. There is no better company in the world doing silicon work than Apple. Bar none, end of discussion. And they're keeping away from things like integrated Wi-Fi and 5G. They're leaving that to Qualcomm, even though they bought Intel's 5G unit, if you remember, a couple of years ago. They've got all the IP and technology to do it. It's just, well, it doesn't quite go there yet because it's an emerging standard and, you know, it's not quite under our control, but we'll go there. Now, what they're doing, I mean, this is a year old. This is an M1 Max, whatever it is, M1 Ultra battery pack. M1 Ultra, 64 gig RAM, God knows how many cores. You wouldn't believe how fast that is. That will edit 10 layers of 4K HDR video simultaneously without dropping a frame, compositing it together with distortions, color corrections, and the whole thing. Yeah? And it will do it with a 20-hour battery life. You can fly to Los Angeles and edit a movie on this and get off the other end with a battery that's still a third full. Unbelievable. You know, it's doing H.265 decode and encode in silicon, because that would be useful, wouldn't it? You know, and that's rapid ramp of capabilities is phenomenal. But they're actually quite conservative in other areas. They've only just gone beyond 1 gigabit per second on Wi-Fi. Even though they've done AX for a year or so, they were always capping it to 941 megabits a second over Wi-Fi of user data. But the latest M2 iPad Pro and the latest M2 MacBook Pros will now do 1.8 gigabits a second of user data.
I've got a question. If Apple started making web servers, which they used to, I guess, but if they started making web servers and they started running banking software and allowed people to produce stuff that way, etc. What I'm saying is, outside of Apple, in an internet ecosystem, who should we trust?
If Apple started making web servers,
Who should we trust on the internet? I mean,
no one.
No.
No one. What do you mean by? Okay, let me throw the question back. What do you mean by trust? What does that mean to you? Right? I trust if I go to Tesco's, they're going to data mine the hell out of me, but they will turn that round and say, well, that means that next time you come round, we can suggest things for your basket because you bought them before. I can see a user value in that. Yeah. And it's not in Tesco's interest to sell that information to Sainsbury's.
Yeah. So
there's a natural border there.
I totally understand those degrees of, the side.
Yeah.
Who should be trusted in a particular realm, but should we trust a certificate authority, for example, an SSL certificate authority, to show that they validated a company enough to...
protocols.
Should we trust third parties because they're trusted by us?
Yes, I would say you should trust TLS, transport level security, SSL at a transport level. Yes, you should. Will there be quantum computing that will be able to break open that? Maybe. Does Langley have the hardware capability to break that open today? Possibly. Are you likely to be a target of interest? Probably not. Sorry, that's my blood sugar again. Somebody told me, so I'm going to turn this off. Somebody told me that you really had to make quite a nuisance of yourself before the UK government and the security services will get interested in you. Why? Because they've only got a few hundred people and they're quite busy. And you've really got to, it's a very big deal for them to come and spy on you, okay? Especially when they can just turn up with a transit van and take everything out of your house with a mains plug. Okay, and please, that happened to a good friend of mine 15 years ago. He was horrifyingly wrongly accused of abusing his daughter. Absolutely didn't happen, not a problem, slightly mad wife, I won't go into details. But she told a good story. Police turned up, 3 transit vans, 20 officers one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and took everything out the house with a mains plug. Because that's easy, you know, they're having tea back at base by 10, right? That's quick surgical boom, they've got everything that you own. And the likelihood of you having a little sort of bat cave somewhere with more stuff in is pretty unlikely, yeah? So sort of deep state surveillance of you, that's really not going to happen unless you really are a person of interest, and then it gets very foggy and very difficult. So who do we trust? I don't have a problem with Tesco giving me half price on some, you know, gin. Well, you know, no one was going to buy it anyway. You've got to be pragmatic about this, and that kind of modelling. I have the choice. I don't have to go to Tesco's. I could go to Sainsbury's. I could go to Lidl. I could go somewhere else. I could move my stuff around. I could shop in different places. I could, you know, if I really wanted to be serious about this, I could buy with I could go into a shop and buy stuff with cash, because it's unlikely they're doing that level of facial recognition, although that level of facial recognition almost certainly happens on Oxford Street and the major stores in London. It certainly does in the casinos in Las Vegas. Yeah, because they have to do that. Yeah, so there are things that you can do to mitigate the problem. There are some things that it's much more difficult. You know, why are you using Google as a search engine? Should you be using DuckDuckGo? Should you be obfuscating? Should you be tunneling? Should you be VPN? There's a whole bunch of stuff. And you've got to ask yourself, at what point do you stop? Because, yeah, you can put a whole bunch of stuff into your browser to cut all of this crap out. It's a bit sad that probably at the end of the day, they're going to capture you as an entity anyway, by some other means. And that's why I say I think it's really, really sad that we have failed so badly. That it really isn't possible to interact in this internet-connected space without being an object to be used. And that wasn't what we wanted. That's not what Tim thought at CERN in 1990, 1991. That's not what we thought when IPv4 came out and we started connecting our hell's bells. I remember the mid-90s. I had a 64K and then a 512K killer stream feed into my house. God, it was expensive. 11,000 a year, I remember. But I was permanently connected. I had public-facing IP addresses. I didn't run a firewall. I didn't run network address translation. My computers had public-facing IP addresses. Did I have a firewall? No. I had a wide-open SMTP server. You didn't need a username and a password to get onto it because, well, you know, good chaps wouldn't abuse it. And we are so far from that place now. And it's happening.
It's not changing anytime soon, though.
No.
In 20 years' time, no one's having an epiphany at any point now and saying, my goodness, we've gone too far, let's roll it back. That's not happening.
It's not going to happen. And that's why, if we were to shut down Facebook, if there was some magic legal wand you could do, and let's just take Facebook because they're on the top of the list. And, you know, this isn't being anti-Zuckerberg, they're just top of the list. And they have 3 billion people modelled worldwide. And we passed some legislative thing whereby they couldn't do anything with that data ever more. We're still screwed for 3 generations. You know, because you've been modelled. Hopefully you're going to reach the ripe age of 85. Yeah? And that's going to be in quite a few years from now. So the things that you do over your lifetime wouldn't be modelled, but you are still an entity in the system. I'll have some insulin in a minute. I'll shut it up. You are still in this for your life. Yeah? Even if you could stop it dead today, it would still lurk for a very long time. And I don't think people actually understand what that means.
Does it help to use Google incognito mode on Chrome, something like that?
Do you trust them?
Don't know. Does it help?
They say so, but I don't know.
What's your expert opinion?
I don't trust anybody.
Fair enough.
You know,
But in this case, it's still natting out from the same IP address.
yeah,
So you weren't using it 5 minutes
What's
ago.
the point?
yeah. You know, and the problem is we're not allowed to look inside their algorithms. We're not allowed to look inside these things because that's commercial sensitivity, and it's commercial sensitivity for a corporation incorporated out of Idaho or wherever the hell it is. You know, we don't even have the legal right to do that. If you want an example of the singular, to my mind, the singular crippling failure of the EU, and I'm not saying pro-EU and I'm not saying negative EU, and this has nothing to do with Brexit. I just say there is a political organisation that big. Why don't we have anything like this out of the EU? Why don't we have a European DNS space? Why is DNS one monolithic thing? Why can't we have two? Why can't we have a Euro DNS? Why can't we have, why can't we have these things? And the answer is because there is neither the political will or the political nous or feeling of the requirement to actually do something like this. And we've just handed the whole thing to the Americans and the Chinese. Why is there no Euro operating system? Germany tried it a bit, rolling out Linux on desktops, and really did it quite badly. You know, it was a nice idea, but it didn't go anywhere. Anybody else I can bore with an answer? Sir?
Trying to see the positive, or like
Yeah?
being naive.
No, there's a huge positives in all of this. I'm just trying to point out the negatives.
It's the old adage of with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
What you're proposing here, what you're telling us is that there is an immense amount of power being held
Yes?
and an immense amount that can be done with this data and
Yes.
this power. And you've talked about product advertising, etc.
Yeah.
etc. And you mentioned a supermarket, and of course you're saying Tesco, it could be any of these supermarkets.
Yes?
But I'm seeing where does
Harrods is the most perfect modelling of high-end retail in London.
okay.
My husband used to be a very senior in Harrods. He used to run the food halls on 28 restaurants. So Harrods understands what high-end retail is because that's what they do.
So where does social responsibility fit into all of this? Whether through morals or through legislation? So in terms of your given supermarket is seeing your buying habits, and you've referenced
Yeah.
right with you there. So suddenly Tesco,
I'm not saying it was Tesco that did that, just to be super clear. Okay, but yeah, okay.
but equally so I would, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing,
I think it's a litmus test. It's a smell test. Yes.
but equally so, that given supermarket can see that you are no longer buying pet food and your food habits have now shifted
Yeah.
to ready meals and your alcohol consumption has gone up. And this,
Oh God, yes. Oh, sorry. Yes.
and this, to any healthcare professional, is ringing alarm bells and saying, hang on, this person is entering, states of depression, mental health, loneliness.
Yeah.
Let's now, instead of pushing product, be pushing, have you seen your GP, etc.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
I said we're not looking for positives. But, is there not that?
Here's the problem. When algorithms go wrong, by God, they go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we could talk for hours about ChatGPT and what's emerging on that space, because there is a presumption of perfection in this, which is wholly invalid. It's one thing to suggest the wrong type of baked bean to me. It's quite another to suddenly get in contact with my GP and say, I think you were feeling a bit peaky today. Well, where do you stop?
Suggest to you.
Okay, you want to be really scared? What sort of competence do you think there is within the NHS to come up with an integrated data model and an integrated patient model? Right? Now, before I go any further, I have a 25-year, 30-year friend who used to be here at Cambridge, Professor Ian Buchan up at University of Liverpool, very senior in the NHS data modelling. He holds the NHS data stack and stuff like that. There are incredibly capable people working on this. Yeah, you know, if it comes to a medical matter, I would quite happily put myself in Ian's hands. You know, I trust him with my life. Okay. How good do you think this fog is at being able to deal with this? Yeah. That these are the captains of the ship trying to turn an oil tanker that's 35 miles long in a storm. If we can't get an NHS integrated platform working in a meaningful way...
But knowing what I know as a healthcare professional...
I know, yes.
This may be a controversial statement. I would probably have more faith in the data mining of some of these companies than I would in the NHS IT.
Except we had the example of, was it Queen Mary in London that handed over a whole bunch of data to Google for AI training?
Right.
Except that was done without the consent of the patients. And where in all of this was well, you can have our data platform of all of this, because the NHS is almost unique in its ability to have this data set in the world, yeah? And we would agree on that. You can have this bunch of data to train your engines against, but but we want something back. And we would like to have co-ownership of the model and the learning. No, that's not what's happening, right? And it's not happening because a variety of reasons, one of which is I suspect that the people on the NHS England side, and I'm not talking ministers here, I'm talking the people, get starry-eyed. Oh, we can do some really clever AI modelling and looking at scans of tumours in people's lungs, and they would have a higher rate, and this is good for the patient. Of course it's good for the patient. You know, there's a huge upside here. But you know, I have ongoing arguments with my good friend Rory Catlin-Jones, ex-BBC, and he has is it Parkinson's he has, if I remember rightly, yeah. And he's exploring. He has a really good newsletter. He's exploring all these technologies to help with his Parkinson's, and you know, I feel for him. And he's a great guy, and I enjoy time I've spent with him. But you know, we do come to slight loggerheads sometimes over just how much do you think we should all be handing over to who, for what purpose, where, how, what are they going to do with it? You know, I could talk for the next, we could argue for the next 2 hours over patient health records, modelling, digital avatars, which is something that Prof. Buchan is working on, because actual digital avatars is actually the root out of this mess, whereby I establish a digital identity, which is me. I control it, it's XML based, it's open platform, and I decide where it's sat, and all of the traffic that happens to me, whether it be phone calls, emails, Twitter traffic, everything goes through my digital avatar, and I maintain that. And then when I want to talk to you, my digital avatar talks to your digital avatar, and we have a contractual relationship, we have an end-to-end encryption relationship, and you control your end of it, I control my end of it. And then we need basically effectively a sort of an identity DNS, if you like, where I could look up somebody and say, you know, and it's now no longer a phone number, it's no longer an email address, because all these things rot. We've managed to end up with a situation that we can have multiple phone numbers, multiple email addresses, multiple physical addresses, multiple work addresses, let alone LinkedIn profile, Facebook address, Messenger, TikTok, etc., etc. And this is now a geometrically increasing problem, because you add another one to this list, you subscribe to WhatsApp, and suddenly there's another whole world of complexity that's added to this. And we should be in a situation where that gets added to my digital avatar, and that's then negotiated on my behalf, but the whole thing is owned by me. I proposed this to Google. I proposed this to Google a few years ago over a rather good dinner in, I can't remember where it was now, to a very good friend who was very senior at Google at the time. And the answer was, yeah, but how are we going to do advertising through it? It's like, oh, no. Yeah, but there is a way, and that's where we may actually see a rise of this on the back of NHS digital health avatar that is then an entity that's got my health records, but I can control who has access to it. There's all sorts of wild and crazy stuff we could talk about, like your public-private key encryption keys, yeah? Wouldn't it be really fabulous if you could just go to a bank hole in the wall with a card, put it in, and load and download your keys? We have a full infrastructure in place of trusted entities called banks, and we trust them because we give them your money. Yeah? But why don't we trust them with an element of identity? Why can't I have a digital identity that is made up of a composite of a set of trusted people? So my bank would be a high-level trust, a sort of a gold-level trust, if you like, and a building society, and my Tesco club card, it's a bit of an identity, but it's kind of a bit lower, you know? And being a member of Cambridge Rugby Football Club, it's a bit of identity, but it's right down here, yeah? But you build up a composite of identity, okay? And then if I want to say, I want to talk to you, are you really who you are? And you could then provide back a standardized set of XML descriptions around your identity, my identity, and I can then, my avatar on my behalf can say, yeah, I think you are who you are. Yeah, you are actually you. And therefore, I now want to have a conversation with you. And the route by which that conversation happens is entirely decoupled from the conversation itself. Yeah? So in a really wild world, wouldn't it be really great to have a phone call with you through our digital identities, because it's voice over IP, with real-time translation in place as well, because it could be that you actually only speak French and I only speak English, but our digital entities do the real-time translation. So as far as we're concerned, I'm having a conversation in English. As far as you're concerned, you're having a conversation in French. I get home, I get out the car, I turn off the car and I walk into the house, and the conversation automatically is rerouted by my identity to a smart speaker in my house, and the conversation continues. Wouldn't it be great to then be able to have a textual record of this that was searchable across any medium? And then we just said, I'm sorry, we'll go on to email. And we've now gone to a much more asynchronous, slow method of email conversation, but it's still the same thread. All of this is perfectly possible to do. And if you then have the element of trust in this, because I determine where my identity is, how it runs, who I pay for it, and I can move it elsewhere if I want to. And because it's like a hierarchical DNS lookup of global distributed identities, I can move it and everybody then rewires up to where it is now. And it then means I can go to America and I can get off the plane and Apple can give me, because at that point they are a mobile virtual network operator. I get off the plane in New York, well, I got off the plane in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago, and all of a sudden it just says, oh, you're in Los Angeles. I can see from your diary you're here for 5 days because you're taking this plane back in 5 days' time. I'll just sort you out with an American phone number. And you go, this American phone number is now dropped into your cloud identity. I don't need to know what it is. But if I need to make a restaurant booking with an American restaurant, they tend to only like American phone numbers. But I've got one now, and it's there to burn and reuse and so forth, because it's not controlled by me, it's controlled by something under my control. Wouldn't that be really fabulous?
It would be fabulous, but ethically. So going back to your health things, there's a question about ethics. Your watch has been beeping because it's telling you about your insulin levels.
Yeah.
So you've entrusted Apple health record with some of your health stuff, right?
Yeah.
And when you sleep at night, it notices your sleep pattern.
Yes.
It maybe ties in terms of what you're buying in the case of alcohol and fast food and other things.
Yeah.
The question is, am I okay to allow them to run those algorithms on my data and make a recommendation to me that I go and see my GP? Do I opt into that, or do they just force that?
But if my watch is monitoring my heart rate and suddenly notices that I've got an arrhythmia and tells me, great.
I like it. The question is,
it might keep me alive. If I'm out on a motorbike and I fall off, and I know there's been some problems with skiers, that's tweaking the algorithm, that's not a fundamental problem. I fall off my motorbike and it knows that I'm in a crash and it calls 999 and it then speech reads out my latitude and longitude and what's happened. Yeah, there's never something for nothing, and I will take that because of the potential benefits for it. But I've made the decision to enable that. I've made the decision. Yeah, I have this Dexcom real-time scanner here that I actually changed this evening. In fact, if you don't know what these damn things look like, that's what sits on you with a little filament that goes into you, and it lasts 10 days. And it gives me real-time monitoring of my blood sugar level, which is kind of like important if you are a insulin-injecting diabetic, because you're self-medicating. Fast insulin, I decide how much I'm going to have, and you get it wrong, and you end up in hospital.
Or should supermarkets, social media, etc., either morally or legally, should they have a what was the phrase I used? A social responsibility to you.
They have a social responsibility to ask me.
Yes, that's fair.
And that's Apple's position.
Yeah.
Apple's position is, if you want permissions for something, you ask the user. And if you watch that presentation that Tim gave about this a while ago, he said, and then you ask them again. And then in a month's time, you ask them, are you still happy with this? And if they keep telling you you're happy with this, maybe you then say, I'll ask you again in 5 or 6 months. Or if Apple notices, or whoever the back end is, notices that something's changed, is the way that some data is being processed, maybe they elevate it and come back and say, we're not happy with what they're doing. Are you still sure? You know, the software that's running this, are you still happy with this? I'm okay, that's fine. Yeah. But we have got no element of consent in any of this. Well, you know, you install a piece of software and you get this end user license agreement of 97,000 pages, and you scroll it down it. You scroll, you know, if you thought scrolling down that list of people who are on the Daily Mail site was difficult, start going through an end user license agreement. And people just go straight to the bottom, yes. That's not consent. How have we allowed that to happen? Yeah? And something like health, yeah, the software that's running this, it should be, are you sure you want to be doing that? Yeah, I am, because it keeps me alive. And there's a benefit, there's a cost-benefit analysis here that I can do as a grown-up about my data. My GP, because I pay for this, because I'm not 14 and type 1, I'm type 1.5 or something. Mine was collapse of my immune system through stress when I was my dad's full-time carer in his final 2 years when he had Alzheimer's and dementia. Not something I would recommend anybody does, okay? And the stress levels of that collapsed my immune system and brought on diabetes. And it's been going downhill. It doesn't matter what I do, lose 20 kilos, blah, 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 blah. And I'm now on insulin. Fine, that's how it was. And I wouldn't change it for the world because I was looking after my dad. Anyway, the point though is, Christ, I've lost the point.
You're the customer.
I'm the customer. It's my choice. I choose. If I want to change from this and go back to a Libra 2 or a Libra 3, totally different platform, same technology, different company, I can do that. I can stop and I can do finger pricking with blood strips if I want to be stupid, because they're a complete waste of time, but it's the NHS way. Sorry, that's right. I pay for that. £150 a month, right? Because the NHS won't give it to me for free because I'm not a deserving case. Now, okay, I'm, 58, coming on 59, I can afford to pay for that, and I don't begrudge the GP. GP asked me for my whole health set record out of it, and I said no. And she said, why? I said, because you require me to have an HbA1c blood test every 3 months, well actually now every 6 months because I'm a good boy, and that's your metric of whether I'm being good or not. Why should I hand you over the data? What are you going to do with it? And my GP was actually very sensible about this and said, oh, I see what you mean. Oh, yeah, And please bear in mind, I've had endless discussions with Professor Buchan. I think this kind of blood sugar measurement stuff should be out in the population, because there will be a whole bunch of people in this room who are effectively pre-diabetic and you have no idea that you are, right? John's medical tip for the evening: go to Libra or go to Dexcom. I haven't got the box here, yeah. Dexcom G6, 150 quid for a month, 100 quid for a starter kit, gets you go for a month. Do it for a month. Check your blood sugar levels in real time for a month. Learn what's happening, because you might be terrified. And I hope our good doctor here would say that would be a bloody good idea, because you may think you're perfectly fine. When was the last time you had an HbA1c test done at your GP? Answer probably never. And unless you are truly grossly diabetic, so you get that really incredible dry throat and feeling and so forth, you probably haven't got a clue. Do it at your age. God, that woke you up. Yes. No, do it, right? because you have no idea of your body's response to food intake and sugars and carbohydrates. None whatsoever. And the best thing you can do is go and learn. Do it, if it's fine, great. And do it again in 3 years' time, and do it again in 6 years' time.
I would say I've written software for active insulin monitoring.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring this back to the consent thing in a second.
Yes.
So, it's an interesting.
And that's fun, because if you get that wrong, you can kill someone very quickly.
And it was, believe it or not, internet driven. So we were told we had to get.
Oh, can I step back slowly? Because, you know.
No, we had to get it licensed and it needed to be tested.
Yeah, but I know the edge cases. I run a product test lab.
Absolutely. So we had to go through 28 states. And
Yeah.
things, and it was kind of me briefing the team. And you know, it's one of those things. Test again.
Yep.
Do it variety of ways. Get it wrong, we'll kill someone.
Yeah.
It's not a case of
Yeah.
lose business.
No.
But the interesting thing about consent was the company I was doing it for was Medtronic. So
Yeah, I know Medtronic, yes.
so
Pumps.
active pump monitoring. And they at the beginning said we have to have consent, obviously, to take it, and we're going to hold the data. And they left it at that. So it's individual consent. They did not aggregate the data in any way whatsoever. We'd said, have you asked the patients if you can aggregate the data? Because there's going to be some really interesting metrics.
Yeah.
They said, oh, we think it's going to be a no. And we said, ask.
Yeah. A whole bunch of people.
Absolutely.
If I knew where my data was going, I would more than happily say yes.
0%, 100% said, please take our data,
Yep.
use it in aggregate.
Yep.
And we were able to improve the accuracy and the efficacy of the software.
Yeah.
By multiple.
And you know, this matters. This is fast insulin. It's open to discussion, and I'll take a medical opinion. There's probably enough in there. There's enough in there to put you into a coma and quite possibly kill you. It's actually almost a perfect way of killing somebody, because your body processes insulin even when you're dead. And this matters. This is where this happens.
My point is.
But why aren't we having a grown-up discussions about this?
I think there are benefits of consent.
I'm keen to hear from the doctor whether that would kill someone. Is it not quite handy?
Is that the fast-acting insulin?
Yeah. It's Nova Rapid.
Assuming you've got 1 mil in there, 1 mil will knock.
Yeah, I've got 3 mil.
Yeah.
3 mil of 100 units per mil. So I've got 300 units.
In my head, that would knock 30 off your blood sugar. So if my blood sugar is 7, and anything less than 1.4 is really fatal.
Well, I'm not allowed to drive legally if it goes below 4.
And this was actually
It's a criminal offence.
yeah, and this was actually something I submitted to Tim, which I don't know if he shared with you, which was I was trying to make an article of it, and I just couldn't get enough words. But it was exactly the ethics of
Yeah.
that, the benefits of what you're doing.
I do not believe the NHS is able to have that consent conversation in a grown-up, meaningful way that I feel that I'm still part of it. We had that thing with COVID data, wasn't it? They shut the modelling down because, you know, it was almost a bit too difficult, you know, so throw it all away. Who are these idiots? Anyway, we have to stop. We could keep talking, and please, I'm not running off anywhere. We can keep chatting, but we do have to bring this to a close, because otherwise, I know someone will shoot me. But thank you very much for coming tonight. I hope it was interesting. I hope it opened some eyes or just raised some thoughts. If it did, if you just sat there and thought, yeah, I know all that, and that's fine. That's not a problem. I just wanted to try and raise some of these points with you. I don't know what the answers are. I don't, but we have to start finding some, and we have to start finding some soon. Thank you.